Marriage does not always break with shouting. Sometimes it breaks with paper, with a date, with a room number you cannot unknow once you have seen it. Adriana Bellini Salvatore, 24, lived inside a world of silk, vows, and careful silence. Unaware she had married herself to the sharpest edge of New York's Italian underworld. She had wanted a husband she could learn, a truce she could survive. And perhaps one day, a marriage that did not feel borrowed. Instead, there was the receipt. Then 12 more, all from the same hotel, all hidden in the lining of her husband's jacket. All dated back to the honeymoon he had barely touched her through. Dante Salvatore watched her from the distance he kept from everyone. His wife. His mistake. The only soft thing in a life that had taught him softness got people buried. He had already done terrible things to keep her alive. New York nights aren't always bright. Some evenings, the darkness only serves those inside. And on the night Adriana found the 13th receipt, she was still innocent enough to think the worst thing hidden in her husband's jacket was another woman. It wasn't. The first thing I heard was the soft metallic click of my silver thimble against Dante Salvatore's jacket. Not his voice. Not the murmured Italian outside the dressing room. Not the heavy door opening and closing while men carried news in and fear out. Just that small sound. Tinny. Domestic. Completely wrong for a room that still smelled faintly of gun oil and rain. The tear in the lining had come from his left inner pocket. A hard rip, recent, like somebody had grabbed him, or he had caught the jacket on something sharp while moving fast. The wool was expensive. The damage was not. I sat by the window in our bedroom at the villa with the jacket across my knees, and the city spread below the glass in cold white squares. I had been his wife for 6 months, long enough to know the shape of his silence, not long enough to know what he did with it when he left me sleeping. The honeymoon had been a blur of first-class flights, locked penthouses, room service under silver domes, and a husband who slept on the chaise beside the bed and disappeared twice each night while I pretended not to hear the door. Everyone said I was lucky. Everyone lied beautifully in his house. I slid 2 fingers through the torn lining, found the edge of what I thought was a business card, and pulled out a hotel receipt. Hotel Belladonna Suite 1106, 2 guests paid in cash. My chest tightened, then loosened, then tightened again when I turned it over and saw the date. The 3rd night of our honeymoon in Florence. For a second I just stared. The room around me stayed still in the expensive muffled way his rooms always did, as if the walls had been taught not to overhear. I went back into the lining. There were 12 more, all folded the same way. All from Belladonna, all Suite 1106. One for every month since. My hand started to shake, not violently, worse than that, in small, humiliating tremors that made the paper whisper against my skin. I should have marched downstairs. I should have thrown them at his face. I should have done what women in bad films did with evidence and betrayal and men in tailored suits. Instead, I stared at the rip in the lining. Then I threaded the needle. I do not know why I did it. Habit, maybe. Hunger. A life spent learning that if something tore and you had the skill to mend it, you did that first, cried later, if at all. I stitched the lining closed around the hidden pocket with 12 tiny blind stitches. The kind my father taught me when I was 11, and our bridal atelier still had 2 floors, 3 assistants, and windows full of gowns instead of debt. I left the last inch open. I was finishing the final knot when Dante came in. He did not announce himself. He never had to. The house changed temperature around him. Men straightened before he spoke. Hallways seemed to clear from instinct. I looked up. He had already taken off the shoulder holster, but the white shirt beneath was open at the throat, and there was a dark thumbprint of blood at one cuff that was not his. His tie was gone. His eyes went first to the jacket in my lap, then to the receipts laid neatly beside me on the bedspread, then to my face. Nothing in him moved. That was the frightening thing about Dante. Other men performed danger. He only occupied it. What did you find, Adriana? I swallowed. A hotel. His gaze shifted to the half-mended seam. You repaired it. It was such a strange thing to say that my breath caught. There was a tear. His stare stayed on me for 1 beat too long. Yes, he said softly. There was. I held up the first receipt because it was better than holding up my hand and letting him see it tremble. Suite 1106, honeymoon date. Then 1 every month after. I counted. He came closer. Not quickly. Never quickly. The carpet drank the sound of his steps, but I felt each one like a hand between my shoulder blades. He stopped just beyond touching distance. If you were going to lie to me, I asked, and hated how steady I sounded. Why marry me first? His jaw tightened once. That was all. I had learned his face in fragments because he gave me so little of it. A twitch in the muscle beside his mouth meant anger. Eyes going completely still meant a decision had already been made. This small pull in his jaw meant I had reached something alive. You think I'm keeping a woman there, shouldn't I? His gaze dropped not to the receipts but to my hand resting on the jacket. My thimble flashed in the lamplight. You should think, he said, that if I wanted another woman, I would not be careless enough to hide proof in a coat you mend. Something hot and miserable burned under my ribs. That isn't an answer. No, then give me one. He bent, took the receipts from my hand, and the backs of his fingers brushed my knuckles. Just that. Barely anything. My whole body noticed. Look at me, he said. I hated that I did. I have never touched another woman since I married you. The room seemed to contract. It was not the answer to the question I had asked. It was more dangerous than that. Because it was specific. Because it left room for too much. Then what is belladonna? He looked past me at the city like the answer was written somewhere outside the glass and not in the room between us. Something keeping you alive. That chilled me more than if he had said a name. I rose so fast the jacket slid from my lap. You don't get to say things like that and then stop. His hand closed around my wrist before I could step past him. Not rough. Absolute. My breath snagged. His thumb rested over the pulse there, measuring nothing I wanted him to have. I do, he said. I looked down at his hand, at the quiet strength of it, at the wedding band against his skin. You are hurting me. His fingers loosened at once, but he did not let go immediately. That one extra second felt worse than the grip. When he released me, I stepped back. He watched me as if I had just done something he had not expected. Maybe I had. Maybe wives in his world threw glasses. Maybe they screamed. Maybe they packed bags and got stopped at gates. I had mended his jacket before I accused him. A foolish, humiliating instinct. He picked up the jacket, slipped the receipts back inside the torn inch I had left open, and set it over his arm. From tonight on, he said, you don't leave the villa without my men. I laughed once. It sounded ugly. Because I found paper? Because now you'll follow it. He turned toward the door. Dante. He paused. I had not called him that often. Usually it was nothing at all. Sometimes my husband, when I wanted the words to cut us both. What am I to you? I asked. He stood with his back to me, the city silvering one side of his face. My wife. That isn't the same thing. No, he said. Then he looked at me over his shoulder, dark-eyed and unreadable. Sarda. The word landed cold, not sweet, not even kind. Just a name for what I was to him before anything else. Seamstress. Useful hands. Then he walked out and locked the door behind him. The next morning, Rosa Valenti brought me coffee in porcelain thin enough to show the shadow of my fingers through it. She had been with the Salvatore family longer than most priests kept parishes. Compact, silver-haired, dressed always in black, Rosa moved around the villa like a woman who had survived every man foolish enough to think he ran it. You should eat, she said. I should probably poison someone. Her brows rose. After breakfast, perhaps. That almost made me smile. The dining room was too large for morning. Sunlight poured across the marble and made everything look honest when it wasn't. The table could have sat 20. Dante occupied one end alone with an espresso, a newspaper he had not turned in 5 minutes, and the kind of stillness men around him mistook for rest. 3 bodyguards stood along the wall pretending not to hear silverware. I took the opposite end because that was what we did. Married people with 6 months of vows and no marriage. He looked up once as I sat. His eyes went briefly to my right hand. No thimble this morning, no needle, no excuse. Good morning, I said, because my mother had raised me correctly before death and debt took turns finishing the rest. He inclined his head. Adriana, I hated that he could turn my name into distance. Rosa set down ricotta toast, figs and eggs. The smell should have made me hungry. Instead, I thought of cash-paid hotel suites and my husband saying something was keeping me alive. I picked up the toast and put it down again. Eat, Dante said without looking at me. Is that an order? It's practical. So are lies. The bodyguards went even stiller. One of them actually stopped blinking. I had not known men could do that. Then a new voice came from the doorway. If we are serving lies with breakfast, I would like mine with no butter. I'm watching my cholesterol. Nino Esposito sauntered in carrying a folder, sunglasses hooked into the neck of his shirt, dark curls already losing the fight against humidity. He was one of Dante's logistics men, which sounded respectable until you understood it meant he could move weapons, people, or $600,000 across 3 boroughs before lunch. He was also, inexplicably, always on a diet. He stopped when he saw me. Then he looked at the table. Then at Dante. Then at the untouched food. Ah, he said gravely, marital weather. Dante folded the newspaper once. Nino. What? I'm being delicate. You've never been delicate in your life. That is slander. Morella says I have fragile emotions. At the mention of Morella, the villa's cook, Nino actually straightened his shirt. I would have liked him less if the gesture had not been so involuntary. From the hall, as if summoned by gossip alone, Morella called, I said your stomach is weak, not your emotions. Nino placed one hand over his heart. Cruelty before 9 in the morning. Against my will, I smiled into my coffee. Dante saw it. He said nothing, but something changed in his face. Not softness. He would not know what to do with softness at the breakfast table. More like surprise that another person had managed what he had not. Nino approached with the folder and set it down beside Dante's hand. Cars are ready. The Bellini atelier is secure. I looked up. My shop? Your workroom, Dante corrected. You asked yesterday to return. You'll go today. It took me a moment to process that. You're allowing it. I'm not imprisoning you. I nearly laughed. You locked my bedroom door. I locked a door. There's a difference. Only to the man with the key. His eyes held mine. Black coffee, black suit, black patience. You'll work at the atelier. You'll return before dark. You go nowhere without escort. And if I say no, then you still return before dark. Nino made a faint sound into his fist that might have been a cough and might have been laughter trying not to die in public. I pushed my plate away. You can't command every hour of my day. No, Dante said. Only the dangerous ones. The room went cold again. Rosa dismissed the bodyguards with one glance and began collecting plates that had barely been touched. She left the fig jam because she knew I liked it. Little acts of treason were all women ever really got. Nino lingered. I've seen worse breakfasts, he told me in a stage whisper. One time he fired a man before coffee. I did not fire him, Dante said. Nino sighed. Correct, fired is optimistic. Even I had to laugh at that, and this time Dante definitely heard it. He rose. The scrape of his chair over the stone sounded like a blade being drawn. At once, the air in the room redrew itself around him. He came down the length of the table until he stopped at my chair. I did not look up immediately. I looked at his hands first. Strong, square, a small scar across one knuckle. He rested 2 fingers on the back of my chair, too close, not touching me, worse. When you reach the atelier, he said, Julia will check the rooms first, because of Belladonna, because of me. That should not have made sense, and yet it did. I lifted my face. He was watching me with that impossible concentration of his, as if silence itself were a form of pressure. I'm not afraid of your men, I said. I know. Then who exactly am I meant to fear? His gaze dropped for half a second to my mouth, then returned to my eyes so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. My enemies, he said, and my mistakes. My pulse stumbled. I opened my mouth to answer. He had already stepped away. At the door, he paused. Wear something you can run in, Sarda. Cold again, controlled. The word fell between us like a line he had no intention of crossing. Then he left me with my coffee, Nino's tragic diet, and the first real understanding that whatever lived behind those receipts had not ended when I found them. It had started. My atelier sat above a florist on Mulberry Street, where the air smelled like roses, exhaust, and money being washed through old brick. Bellini Bridal used to occupy both floors. After my father disappeared and the debts came due, I sold the upstairs workroom, kept the front studio, and learned to stand in one place long enough to do the work of 3 women. I made veils, altered gowns, repaired christening lace, older than the Republic, and pretended survival was a business plan. Now 2 of Dante's men checked the stairwell before I even got out of the car. Julia Ferrante arrived a minute later in a camel coat over scrubs, dark hair caught in a loose knot, expression as warm as clean steel. Dante's cousin, family doctor. The only woman in his circle who looked at me as if I were either a patient or a problem, and neither status surprised her. You sleep, she asked as she moved through the shop, checking locks. Not especially. Eat? Apparently that's everyone's obsession today. It should be yours, she said. You get lightheaded when you're anxious. I stared. How would you know that? I treated you after the wedding mass when you nearly fainted. I had forgotten. Or tried to. Her mouth shifted almost into a smile. You notice stitches better than faces. Noted. That was true enough to be rude. When the men finished sweeping the rooms, they stationed themselves outside and pretended flowers in the front display were tactical information. Julia left with a warning about open windows. Then, for the first time in days, I was alone. Or as alone as I ever was now. I stood in the workroom and let my hand move over familiar things. Tailor's chalk, silk pins, a padded ham for pressing curved seams. The old iron my father refused to replace because new machines make lazy hands. On the center form hung the gown I had started 2 weeks before the wedding season became irrelevant to me. Ivory Duchess satin, pearl buttons down the spine, hidden beneath the outer skirt, a facing of dark rose silk no one would see unless the dress was turned inside out. I had not realized until that moment exactly what I had made. Something that looked pure from the front and carried a wound no one could see. I laughed once under my breath, pathetic. Then I went to work because work was the only thing that had ever made my head quiet. 3 hours passed in chalk lines and steam. I was adjusting the neckline when I heard the studio bell downstairs, not the heavy tread of Dante's men, not a customer either. Customers hesitated in bridal shops. Men like Dante did not. He came up without asking permission. Black suit today, no tie, overcoat open. The room seemed to shrink around his height in silence. He stopped beside the dress form and looked at the gown for a long moment. It's unfinished, I said. Everything is. That sounded too much like him. He touched the rosa silk hidden under the outer layer with one knuckle. Careful, as if it might bruise. You put a darker seam inside. It keeps the structure from collapsing. His gaze shifted to me. Is that why? I set down the scissors because I had a sudden, vivid understanding of how sharp they were and how close he stood. Why are you here? You weren't answering your phone. I had left it in the drawer on purpose. That isn't an answer, no, he said. The corner of my mouth almost betrayed me. You do that on purpose. Yes. He moved past me toward the cutting table where the Belladonna receipts lay inside my ledger, the edges just visible between pages. I reached for them at the same time he did. Our hands collided. Not hard, just enough for heat. My breath caught. So did his, I think, though with Dante it was hard to tell what belonged to air and what belonged to restraint. He looked down at our hands. Mine was under his. Ridiculous how much I noticed. The width of his palm, the coolness of his ring, the stillness, like even his skin knew how not to tremble. I should have pulled away immediately. I did not, neither did he. The studio bell rang downstairs again, sharp and bright, and the spell broke. I jerked back first. A boy from the florist appeared halfway up the stairs with a box. Delivery for Bellini Bridal? Dante's body turned between me and the door before thought even finished forming. By the time the boy set the white bakery box on the table, one of Dante's men was behind him checking the label. I stared. What is wrong with all of you? Many things, Dante said. Today specifically, patience. The box held pastries from Ferrara's. Nino's doing, obviously. A note tucked under the ribbon read, if Morella asks, I did not send carbs, you ask. Nino, in spite of everything, I laughed. Dante looked at the note, then at me. He'll be insufferable if encouraged. He already is. He'll interpret that as affection. I think he interprets breathing as affection. That almost dragged something like a smile from him. Almost. It altered his whole face for a fraction of a second and vanished so fast it felt stolen. Then his phone buzzed. He checked the screen and all warmth, if it had existed at all, went out of the room. "Pack what you need," he said. "For what?" "We're leaving." "Why?" He held my gaze. "Because someone sent your shop flowers with a bomb in the ribbon wire." My stomach dropped. I looked at the white box, the note, the stairs. The ordinary room that suddenly was not ordinary at all. Dante stepped closer, low voice turning hard. "Did anyone touch anything before my men checked it?" "No." "Good. Was it meant for me?" His silence answered. I looked at the gown on the form, the rose silk hidden inside, and felt the floor tilt under a future I had not fully named. Someone was already moving against us. Dante, he had known the moment Adriana repaired the torn lining before accusing him that he was finished in some way he could not afford. Now there was wire and ribbon at her shop and belladonna in his pocket, and Marco Bellini breathing in a hidden hotel suite 3 miles away. He wanted to tell her none of it was another woman. He wanted, more dangerously, to tell her it was her father. He told her nothing and planned for blood instead. Belladonna stood on a quiet block off Lexington. Elegant in the way old hotels were elegant. Gold leaf in the lobby, polished brass, carpets that swallowed noise, and too many mirrors for a place built on privacy. I understood the moment I stepped inside under escort why Dante had chosen it if secrecy lived here. Nobody looked directly at anyone. Not the concierge, not the bellman, not the woman arranging lilies in the bar. Money had taught the building manners. "What are we doing here?" I asked. Dante did not answer immediately. His hand rested at the small of my back, not touching, only guiding. The absence of contact felt as deliberate as contact would have. We crossed the lobby. An ice machine hummed somewhere down the hall near the service elevator, and Dante's whole body changed. It was slight, a hardening through the shoulders, a pause so brief another person might have missed it. I did not. The elevator doors slid open. He did not move. "Dante, stairs," he said. He took the stairwell instead of the elevator, and the air in there was colder than the lobby, tinged with bleach and old metal. Each landing carried the echo of our steps upward. On the 5th floor, he stopped so suddenly I nearly walked into him. He opened the fire door with one hand, turned, and for the first time since I had met him, looked almost visibly unguarded. "Whatever you see in that room," he said, "you stay behind me." My throat went dry. "Am I in danger?" "Yes." "From who?" He held my eyes. "That depends which door opens first." Then he pushed into the corridor. Suite 1106 waited at the far end. 2 of his men stood outside it. One opened the door for us. I stepped in and saw my father. For a second, my mind refused the shape of him. Marco Bellini had been missing for 17 months. I had buried him without a body because debt collectors had said he ran. Because rival whispers said he was dead, because grief will wear any face if you are tired enough. Now he lay in a hotel bed in a gray undershirt, thinner than memory, hair gone mostly white, oxygen tubing looped under his nose. He looked older and smaller and heartbreakingly alive. The sound that came out of me did not feel human. I moved before anyone could stop me. Dante caught my arm halfway across the room. "Adriana, let me go. There could be a device." I said, "Let me go." Something in my voice must have reached him because he released me immediately. I stumbled to the bed. My father's eyes opened slowly as if consciousness itself hurt. They found my face, filled. "Picture Rita," he whispered, "little one." I dropped to the chair beside him so hard my knees hit the wood. "Papa?" He lifted one trembling hand and touched my cheek with 2 fingers. The skin was dry, real. "I'm sorry." That broke me more than the sight of him. I bent over our clasped hands and cried with my forehead pressed to the blanket, because if I looked too closely, I would see every month he had been alive without me. Dante said something behind me in low Italian to one of the guards. The door shut. When I could breathe again, I turned on him. "You knew." He stood by the window, all sharp black lines against cream drapes. "Yes." "For how long? Since Florence, our honeymoon?" "Yes." Rage hit so fast it steadied me. "And you said nothing?" "Your father was pulled out of a Vescari property with a bullet in his lung and a knife wound under his ribs. He was under sedation for 10 days. By the time he could speak, he asked for time." I laughed through tears. "So you gave him mine?" My father tried to push himself upright. "Adriana." I stood so abruptly the chair skidded. "You let me mourn you. I let you live," Dante said. The words cracked through the room. I turned to him. "Do not speak to me as if those are the same thing." His jaw tightened. "With Marco missing, Vescari stopped looking for leverage through you. If word got out he was alive, you became bait. My daughter," my father rasped, "was never supposed to know." I looked at him in disbelief. "That is not the mercy you think it is." Movement flashed at the door. Dante turned first, gun out before the sound registered. The first shot blasted through the wood where my head had been an instant earlier. I screamed and hit the floor. He crossed the room in 2 strides and came down over me, one arm wrapping around my shoulders, the other firing twice through the half-open door. Men shouted in the corridor, more shots, splintering wood. The smell of cordite slammed into the clean hotel air. My face pressed into the dark wool of his coat. His heart was beating hard, not frantic, furious. "Stay down," he said into my hair. Another bullet punched the lamp beside the bed. Glass sprayed. My father cried out. I tried to move toward him. Dante's hand spread over the back of my neck and held me where I was. "Dante, not now, Sarda." The word should have cut. It did not. It grounded. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started. Silence came in ragged breaths. Mine, his, my father's, men in the hall cursing in Italian. Dante did not rise immediately. He stayed over me another second too long, braced on one arm, his body taking up space between me and every door. When he finally pushed up, he checked the corridor, then offered me his hand. I stared at it, not because I feared it, because I knew if I took it, I would feel too much. I took it anyway. He pulled me to my feet carefully, eyes scanning me for blood. When he found none, something in him eased by one dangerous inch. At the bed, my father caught my wrist weakly. "Leon," he whispered. "He knows." "Knows what?" I asked, but nobody answered. Nino burst through the ruined door a second later, breathing hard, gun in one hand and a paper bag in the other. He froze. "Good news," he said. "I killed a man." "Bad news," I sat on the sfogliatelle. A broken laugh tore out of me before I could stop it. Dante actually closed his eyes once, as if enduring Nino required more discipline than violence. The first mystery ended there. There was no other woman. There was only my father. And whatever hell Dante had been keeping from me in room 1106 had just followed us through the door. We moved my father before dawn to a safe apartment over a shuttered bakery in Brooklyn, where the windows had iron grills and the air smelled faintly of sugar trapped in old walls. He slept most of the day under Julia's supervision, drifting in and out while antibiotics burned through the fever. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea gone cold and tried to arrange my anger into shapes that made sense. Dante stood by the sink, taking a call in low Sicilian I only half understood. He had changed shirts. There was a cut at his temple I had not seen in the hotel chaos, a small one, that somehow made it worse. "You're bleeding," I said when he ended the call. "It's handled." "That is not the same as not bleeding." His mouth shifted. "You've been spending too much time around Julia." I hated that I noticed the amusement. On the kitchen table lay the canvas garment bag Rosa had brought from the villa at my request. My wedding veil was inside. I had asked for it because my father, lucid for exactly 4 minutes that morning, had gripped my sleeve and whispered, "Check the hem." At first I thought grief had turned him strange. Then I remembered Bellini men used to hide money in cuff facings and names in embroidery. My father had built a tailoring business inside a mafia city. Of course he had trusted seams more than safes. I unzipped the garment bag and spread the veil across the table. Dante came closer, though he said nothing. "It looks normal," Julia said from the doorway. "That's the point." I took out my seam ripper, slid on my thimble, and ran my fingers along the rolled edge until I found the flaw. Tiny, half a stitch tighter than the rest. My father's work. He always pulled slightly harder at corners when he was tired. The ripper slid under the silk thread. The click of my thimble against the handle sounded absurdly loud in the room. Inside the hem, folded smaller than prayer, was a strip of onion skin paper covered in numbers, delivery dates, and initials. Ledger codes, not money. Routes. Weapon routes. My stomach turned. No. Dante took the paper, read it once, and went completely still. That had become familiar enough to frighten me in layers. "What?" I asked. He looked at me. "These are Vescari shipments. How were they in my veil? Your father used Bellini garments to move information." My chair scraped back as I stood. "No. He made dresses." "He made dresses," Dante said quietly. "And anything else men paid him to make." Julia swore under her breath. I stared at the delicate ruined edge of my veil and thought of my wedding day. White flowers, cancel smoke, my own hands shaking as Rosa pinned this silk to my hair, while Dante waited below the church steps like judgment in a black suit. My father had hidden contraband numbers in the hem I wore to marry a mafia boss. Something ugly and helpless rose in my throat. Something ugly and helpless rose in my throat. My father had hidden violence in Toul. I put both hands on the table because the room had started to sway. Dante reached for me on instinct, stopped himself halfway, and let his hand fall. That restraint hurt more than if he had touched me. "Read the second line," I said, "because if I didn't keep talking, I would break." He glanced down again. "Doc numbers. Transfer dates." "No." I pointed. "Not doc numbers. Pattern cuts." He looked at me. I took the paper back, anger steadying my hands. Bellini patterns use 3 number groups. Bodice, sleeve, train. My father changed the notation when debt collectors started stealing designs. "These aren't route codes. They're garment bag labels." Julia came closer. "Meaning?" "Meaning the shipments didn't move in crates." I heard my own voice go thin. "They moved inside wedding inventory, packed through the old distribution room in Queens. The one we leased out after Papa disappeared." For the first time since I had known him, Dante looked honestly surprised by me. "How sure are you?" he asked. I met his eyes. "Enough to bet your men on it." Something dark and intent moved through his face. Approval, maybe? Or fear of what it meant that I was right. My father stirred in the next room, coughed, and called weakly for water. I went to him before anyone else could. Old reflex, daughter before sense. He watched me with shame, sitting naked, and his eyes was, "I never wanted you near it. But you put it in my wedding veil." His mouth trembled. "Because no one searches innocence." That landed like a slap. I set the water down too hard. "You used me." His silence was answer enough. When I turned, Dante stood in the doorway watching us both. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The room already knew too much. An hour later, while his men moved toward Queens on the strength of my decoding, Dante buttoned his jacket in the kitchen, the one I had mended. His fingers paused once over the inner pocket. "You were right," he said. I should not have needed the words. I did. Does that happen often? No. That almost made me smile. Then his phone rang. He listened for 3 seconds, face going blank in the way that meant something inside the day had just been broken open. "What is it?" I asked, his gaze lifted to mine. The Queen's room was emptied 20 minutes before my men arrived. Cold spread slowly down my spine. Someone warned them, Julia said. Dante kept looking at me, at the kitchen table, at the ruined veil, at the seam I had opened with my own hands. Only 5 people knew where Marco was, he said quietly. And only 4 knew to check the hem. I stared at him. My father in the next room, Julia at the sink, Dante in the doorway, me in the middle of my own family's wreckage. Say it, I whispered. His voice did not rise, it never had to. We have a traitor. By evening, the villa had turned into a machine. Men moved through corridors with earpieces and holsters. Doors that were usually decorative became strategic. Phones kept vibrating and stopping, as if the whole house had developed a pulse too ugly to hide. Rosa directed servants with the same grave efficiency priests used at funerals. Julia argued with Dante twice and lost both times. Nino, in a bulletproof vest stretched offensively over a black polo, announced to nobody in particular that stress made his body retain water. Your body retains nonsense, Morella told him, shoving a plate of grilled fish into his hands. It's dry. It's food. It's punishment. Die hungry then. Nino looked at me with deep tragedy. You see how she wounds me, and I still plan our future. In spite of myself, I laughed. He brightened like a man handed absolution. Dante saw that too. I was beginning to suspect he saw everything and simply spoke aloud very little of it. He had moved my father again. He had not told me where. I found him near the chapel just after midnight. The family chapel sat off the east wing, small and cold, and built by a grandmother with sins large enough to require architecture. Candle wax scented the air. Marble held the night's chill. Dante stood in the front pew with one hand braced on the wood and his head slightly bowed, though I did not think he was praying. His jacket was off, his shirt sleeves were rolled. There was blood on the white cuff, fresh this time. You're hurt. He turned. It's not mine. I came closer anyway. The wound was a shallow slice across his forearm, angry and wet, nothing life-threatening enough to make my stomach knot. Sit, I said. He did not move. I looked up at him. Must every request become a power struggle? A pause, then to my surprise, he sat. I fetched the chapel's first aid box from the sacristy because Rosa kept them everywhere. Beside the holy oils, one in the garage, one in the kitchen drawer with the emergency candles and spare batteries. Mafia houses and old women believed equally in preparation. When I knelt in front of him, Dante's hand closed around my wrist for one still second. My breath stuttered, his gaze fixed on my face, unreadable. Then he let go, restraint. Again, I cleaned the cut. He did not flinch. The silence between us felt alive, listening. Did you ever mean to tell me about my father? I asked. Yes. When? When I could do it without signing your death warrant. That sounds noble. It isn't. I wrapped the bandage tighter than necessary. He noticed. Said nothing. The chapel lamp painted his face in gold and shadow, softened none of it. Up close, I could see exhaustion at the edges, not weakness. He would die before giving anyone weakness. But exhaustion, yes. The kind that settled into men who had made too many decisions for too many lives. Leon Vescari, I said. That's who my father was hiding from, and helping. I tied the bandage off. Why keep him alive then? Dante's eyes drifted to the altar and away. Because once a long time ago, someone should have kept one person alive and I didn't. I waited. He didn't continue. His silence was heavier than speech. I began to rise. He caught my hand, not roughly, not gently either. More like a confession he had not approved in advance. There was a fire, he said. I went still. In a hotel stairwell. I was 19. Leon gave me an order. Lock the door. Hold the landing. Don't let anyone through until his men were clear. His thumb pressed once into my palm, hard enough to hurt. My sister was on the other side. The air left my lungs. He looked at our joined hands as if he despised them both. I followed the order. Nothing in me knew where to put that pain. His or mine. The bells of the small chapel clock ticked once, twice, then gunfire cracked somewhere outside. Dante was moving before the echo ended. He pulled me up, shoved me behind the stone pillar by the chapel door, and drew his weapon in one seamless motion. Stay here. No, his head snapped toward me. Adriana, I won't hide while everyone else. The side window exploded inward. Glass sprayed the marble. I flinched. Dante turned, took a bullet high through the shoulder instead of the chest, and kept firing. I heard myself scream his name. He dropped the first man outside the window. The second got through the door. Everything after that happened in shards. Nino barreling down the corridor in socks, yelling, I knew midnight carbs were a tactical error. Rosa dragging me lower behind the pew with surprising strength. Dante on one knee, blood running down his arm now in a steady dark sheet, putting 3 rounds into the doorway with frightening calm. One attacker lunged straight for me. I had the brass chapel candlestick in my hand before I understood grabbing it. He caught my wrist. I brought the base down on his face with both hands and felt cartilage give. Dante saw. His eyes flashed to mine in the middle of violence, a swift, startled recognition that I was not as breakable as he had filed me. Then the corridor went quiet. Too quiet. Dante swayed once. I got to him before anyone else. I don't remember crossing the space, only his weight half falling into me, the heat of his blood soaking the front of my dress, his breath rough at my ear. Look at me, I said, and my voice shook so badly it sounded young. Please. He lifted his head. Nino skidded beside us with a medkit and a face the color of bad milk. If he dies, I quit. I mean it this time. He's not dying, I said. Dante's mouth moved against my hair, barely sound. Good. They stitched him in Julia's clinic room while I waited outside with my hands still stained red at the knuckles. When she finally let me in, he was propped against pillows, shirt gone, bandage white and brutal across one shoulder. He looked too powerful, even wounded. That felt offensive. I should leave, I said from the door. You need rest. His eyes found me. Come here. I went because there had stopped being any point lying to myself about that particular weakness. When I reached the bed, he touched the bloodstain on my sleeve with the back of 2 fingers. A soft, almost reverent brush. You could have left the chapel, he said. So could you. A long silence, then, so quietly I almost missed it. You mend what's torn before you ask who ruined it. The room seemed to narrow. He was not looking at the bandage, he was looking at me. That's why, he said. I understood at once. The jacket, the lining, the impossible, humiliating instinct that had made me fix the scene before I accused him. No one in his world had ever expected repair before judgment. Something inside me gave way. His hand slid slow enough for me to stop it, to the side of my face. He did not pull me closer, he waited. I put my hand over his, not because I was brave, because I was already lost. His gaze dropped to my mouth, returned to my eyes. If I kiss you now, he said, voice roughened by pain and something darker, I won't stop because I want to. I'll stop because you're shaking. I know. Do you? I could hardly breathe. I'm not afraid of you. His thumb stroked once beneath my cheekbone. That isn't what worries me. Then he leaned in. The first kiss was not hungry. It was worse, slow, careful. The kind that asked a question and answered it with the same mouth. I felt his restraint in it, the effort, the terrible control, and I felt beneath that what it cost him. When he pulled back, I was the one who moved toward him by a fraction. His eyes closed once, opened. Adriana, I said the truest thing I had. Don't be gentle with me because you pity me. A beat, then his forehead rested lightly against mine. Never, he said. The door opened before anything more could happen. Of course it did. In this house, desire had to fight logistics. Nino leaned in, took one look, and covered his eyes dramatically. Fantastic. Love and triage. Meanwhile, half my men are bleeding, and Morella says if I track one more drop on her tile, she'll finish what the shooters started. Dante's laugh was only air. Barely there, but I heard it. Then his face changed, war settling in. Nino, he said. Yes, boss. Leon just declared himself. Nino's hand dropped from his eyes. We found the message? Dante looked at me when he answered. He sent it in her blood on my floor. And just like that, whatever had begun between us in the chapel had no right to stay soft. War had arrived. The next 3 days were measured in funerals that had not happened yet. 2 Salvatore men died before sunrise. One of Vescari's storefronts burned by afternoon. Somebody shot out the windows of a social club in Queens. Somebody else left a severed lock on the hood of one of Dante's cars as if symbolism counted as strategy. Inside the villa, everything narrowed. Meals were shorter, voices lower, doors checked twice. The silence of armed men pretending to be still became the soundtrack of my life. Even the air felt trained. And through it all, Dante moved untouched at the center. Not because nothing could hurt him, but because everyone around him had built themselves around the possibility that it might. That was the first real cost of loving a dangerous man. You met the architecture of everyone else's fear. I found Rosa in the laundry room pressing shirts with the focus of a general moving troops. Steam sighed from the iron. She did not look up when I came in. You should go, she said. The bluntness made me stop. Excuse me? She set the iron upright. Julia arranged a car to the airport for tonight. Palermo first, then wherever you want. I stared at her, without telling Dante. With his knowledge, she said. Not his blessing. That sounded exactly like him. My heart thudded once heavily. He wants me gone. He wants you alive. Those are not the same thing. Rosa looked at me then, really looked. Her old eyes missed very little. No, she said, they are not. On the work table beside her lay one of Dante's white shirts, a button missing at the cuff. Without thinking, I picked up the sewing tin. The silver thimble slid onto my finger. Click, Rosa heard it. So did I. He notices that sound, she said quietly. I looked up too fast. What sound? The thimble. She resumed ironing. The first week after your wedding, he came into the west sitting room while you were hemming curtains, stood in the doorway 5 full minutes listening to that little metal tap like it was a language. Heat rose to my face for reasons I refused to inspect. Rosa saved me by changing the subject. Palermo leaves at 8. Before I could answer, shouting broke in the corridor. I ran. It was Nino, white-faced and swearing, carrying Morella in his arms. For one terrifying second I thought she was dead, then I saw the blood on his sleeve wasn't hers, it was his. A line across his ribs where a bullet had grazed him. Morella was conscious, furious, and clenching a rolling pin like she planned to retaliate personally. He tried to be gallant, she announced as Nino staggered into the salon. It made everything worse. A man shot at you, Nino gasped. I absorbed trauma heroically. You tripped over basil. There were many strategic herbs. Despite the blood, despite the horror clawing up my spine, I laughed. So did Morella. Nino looked offended by our ingratitude and fainted directly onto Rosa's best rug. Julia arrived seconds later and started issuing instructions with surgical profanity. The laughter died when she cut Nino's shirt open, and I saw how much blood there really was. Morella's face changed first. Something soft, frightened, and painfully honest moved across it. She reached for his hand as if she had forgotten other people were in the room. That was when I understood the second cost. Nobody stayed near Dante without eventually paying. Later, after Julia stitched Nino and Morella bullied him through soup by threatening humiliation if he refused, I went upstairs and packed. Not much. A passport. Cash Rosa had already put in an envelope because old women in criminal houses expected heartbreak. 2 dresses. The photograph of my parents before debt hollowed them out. My grandmother's rosary. I stood in the middle of our bedroom with the bag at my feet and looked at the marriage bed nobody had really used. The chaise where Dante had slept our first month like a man punishing himself for wanting something he believed would kill it. The window where I had mended his jacket and found the receipts. I could leave. That was the unbearable part. The door was open. No one had to drag me. No one had to trap me. There was a car waiting and a plane after that and some version of my life beyond him if I wanted it badly enough. The villa shook faintly with a distant blast. I closed my eyes. By the time I reached the front gate, dusk had gone blue and the driver was already holding the rear door open. Julia stood beside the car with her arms folded, as if she knew better than to hurry me. "You do not owe him martyrdom," she said. "I know. You do not owe your father redemption either." My throat tightened. "I know. Then leave because you want a life, not because you're scared to choose one." I nodded. I even took one step toward the car, then I heard it. Not a voice, not shouting. The small metallic click of my thimble in the pocket of the coat I was wearing. I had forgotten I tucked it there. Such a stupid sound. It split me open. Because all at once I saw him in the chapel, bleeding on marble, saying that was why. I saw the torn lining in my lap. The way he stopped himself every time wanting me threatened to become selfish. The ugly, costly truth of his world. And the uglier truth that somewhere inside it, something in him had remained capable of being gentled by care. This was not innocence anymore, not untouchedness, not safety. This was choice. If I left, I could keep the old version of myself, the girl who believed surviving was enough, the woman who still thought love should come clean or not at all. If I stayed, I lost her. I turned away from the car. Julia didn't try to stop me. When I walked back through the iron gates, the guards looked at me with something new in their faces. Not pity, not suspicion, recognition. I found Dante in the east study with blood on his cuff and maps spread across the desk. He looked up when I entered, then at the travel bag still in my hand. For 1 second I saw it, the expectation that I had come to say goodbye. I set the bag down and placed my passport on the desk between us. "I'm not leaving." His gaze lifted slowly to mine. "Adriana, no." My voice shook, but I held it. "Don't make this noble. Don't tell me to go because it would be easier to hate you for it. I saw the gate. I saw the car. I know what this costs." He came around the desk in silence. I did not move. When he stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell cold night on him beneath cedar and smoke, his hand lifted as if to touch my face. He stopped an inch away. "Almost. Always almost. You should hate me anyway," he said. "Probably." A flicker at the corner of his mouth, gone instantly. Then the study doors burst open. One of his men staggered in, pale and panicked. "Boss, Brooklyn safe apartment. We were hit. Every bit of warmth died in the room." "What happened?" Dante asked. The man swallowed hard. "Marco Bellini is gone. If hell had a smell, it would be bleach over blood." That was what hit me when we reached the Brooklyn apartment. Industrial cleaner thrown too late over violence. Chairs overturned. One window blown inward. The narrow hallway striped with dark brown where someone had dragged something heavy. Or someone. My father was not there. Neither were the two guards Dante had left. One lay dead in the kitchen. The other was alive just long enough to choke out "inside job" before Julia shoved me backward so I would not see how much of his throat was gone. But I saw enough. That image lived behind my eyes while we drove back to the city in total silence. "Inside job." The phrase settled into every corner of me, into Rosa's pressed sheets, into Nino's bad jokes, into my father's hand on my cheek at the hotel, into the veil hem and the roots and the years I had spent telling myself love and loyalty at least meant the same thing inside a family. By dawn, Dante had the house sealed. No one in, no one out. He questioned his own men in the downstairs office one by one. No shouting, no threats I could hear. That made it worse. Men came out of that room with their collars damp and their eyes fixed on nothing. I waited in my workroom on the 3rd floor because waiting had become a kind of occupation. My dress form stood near the window wearing a muslin shell pinned with red thread. Half a body, half a future. I had been trying to finish the pattern for weeks and failing for reasons I pretended were logistical. On the cutting table lay one of Dante's torn handkerchiefs, a shirt cuff missing a button, and the small domestic damage of war. I picked up the shirt first. Not because it mattered most, because it was the only thing I could make obey. The thimble clicked, needle in, needle out. My hands remembered even when the rest of me didn't. The door opened behind me. I did not turn. "Did you find the traitor?" "No." My father's voice. The needle stabbed my finger. I spun so fast the chair fell. Marco Bellini stood in the doorway with a gun in his shaking hand and shame so naked in his face I knew the answer before he spoke. "Papa," I said, and barely recognized my own voice. He looked thinner than he had at Belladonna, more frightened too, like being alive had turned out worse than dying. Behind him stood 2 Vescari men in dark coats, weapons low and casual in the way of men who had already counted the exits. "You sold them the apartment," I whispered. His eyes filled. "I bought you time." "No," I took one step back. "No, you don't get to say it like that. He would have killed me. And so you offered me?" He swore he only wanted leverage, a trade. "You for safe passage." Something in my face must have changed because he flinched as if struck. "You taught me to sew straight seams," I said, "to finish what I start, to stand by my work." My throat tightened around every word. "And this is what you are." He looked at the floor. A coward, that at least, was true. The Vescari man nearest him smiled faintly. Family reunions. Always so emotional. I grabbed the shears from the table. The man's gun came up. Try it, he said. I went very still. My father took a step forward. Don't hurt her. One of the men laughed. You already did that for us. They moved fast after that. One seized my wrists. The shears hit the floor. My father said my name like prayer and regret were interchangeable things. They shoved me down the servant stairs and out through the side courtyard before anyone in the villa could intercept them. The efficiency was the point. Someone had timed guard rotations. Someone knew blind spots. Inside job, they blindfolded me in the van. The city became turns, brakes, the smell of diesel, and my father's breathing somewhere to my left. Too fast, too guilty. I could have wept. I was too angry. When the blindfold finally came off, I was back at Belladonna. Of course I was. Suite 1106. Same cream walls, same heavy drapes, same bed my father had occupied days before. Only now the lamp was gone and the room smelled of old cigarettes and male cologne and fear. Leon Vescari stood by the window. He was older than Dante by 20 years and carried that age like expensive tailoring. Silver at the temples, hands clean, dark suit cut perfectly. He might have passed for a senator from a distance. Up close, the eyes ruined it. Warmth had never lived there, only taste. So, he said, studying me. This is the wife. I said nothing. He smiled. Good. Dante does adore composure. My father sat in a chair near the wall, wrists tied, face gray. Betrayer and hostage both. It should have complicated my anger. It didn't. Leon poured himself a drink. Do you know what your husband was before he became a king, Adriana? He was a weapon with manners. I taught him most of the useful things. You taught him to lock doors, I said. For the first time, Leon's expression sharpened. I had guessed correctly. Or perhaps I had only touched the edge of a known wound. He told you about Lucia. Leon tipped his head. Interesting. My pulse drummed hard in my throat, but I held his gaze. He told me enough. Then you know what sentiment costs. I looked at my father. Apparently I do. Leon laughed softly. Good, we understand each other. He moved closer, setting the glass down on the dresser. Here is what will happen. Dante will come. He will come recklessly, because that is what men like him do once they mistake one soft thing for salvation. And when he does, he will choose. Choose what? You or his throne. I should have been terrified. I was. But terror had begun to change shape on me. It no longer made me smaller. It made everything hard and bright. Leon leaned nearer. Do you know why he hasn't touched you properly? My face burned hot with fury. He smiled because that was the reaction he wanted. Because every hotel room reminds him of smoke and his sister screaming. He made your honeymoon a vigil and called it mercy. I lunged before thought caught up. Not far. The man beside me yanked my arms back. But it was enough to wipe the smile off Leon's face. Careful, he said, voice cooling. You may have inherited more of him than is convenient. Good, I thought savagely. Let it be inconvenient. When night fell, they tied my wrists to the iron bed frame. They did not know who had taught me to construct a corset. Steel boning, hidden channels, pressure points. My dressmaker's world was full of quiet instruments of control. The hem of my skirt concealed one slim needle taped into the seam where I kept it for fittings. I worked it free by feel after midnight, sawing at the rope one patient thread at a time until my wrists bled. In the chair by the wall, my father watched me and wept soundlessly. I did not stop. The first strand gave way just as gunfire erupted somewhere below us. Dante had come. The first explosion shook dust from the crown molding. The second took out the hallway lights. Shouts rose from below, Italian, curses, the hard, ugly percussion of men deciding other men did not get to see morning. I had one wrist free, the other almost. My father stared at the door like redemption might still come wearing a black suit and his daughter's forgiveness. Cut me loose, he whispered. I kept sawing. Adriana, please. You sold me. Tears ran into the deep lines around his mouth. I know. The rope snapped. I stumbled up, blood returning to my hands in painful pins. The room pulsed with red emergency lights now, making everything look already remembered. I crossed to him with the needle still clutched between my fingers. For one suspended second, I thought about leaving him tied to the chair. I thought about every month he had been alive and absent. The veil hem, the lie, the van. The way he had let strange men put hands on me to save himself. Then I cut him free anyway, not because he deserved it. Because I needed to know I still recognized myself. Before he could stand, the door burst inward. The first man through it died before he hit the carpet. Dante. He entered the room like judgment, finally bored of waiting. Gun up, face splashed with someone else's blood, coat gone, shoulder wound reopened, a dark stain spreading beneath his shirt. Behind him came Nino and two others, fast and lethal and very much alive. For one impossible heartbeat, Dante's eyes found mine and the entire room narrowed to that. I was on my feet, untied, not crying. Something in his expression cracked, not composure. Something deeper and more dangerous than that. He crossed to me in 3 strides and took my face in both hands, hard enough to make sure I was real. His forehead hit mine once, almost violent with relief. You cut yourself free. I had a needle. Of all the things I might have said, that one made Nino bark out a laugh while firing into the hall. Of course she did. Boss, your wife is terrifying. Also, I regret to report cardio remains hostile. Then he slammed the door and dropped the lock. The sound of Morella's name came out of him next in a muttered prayer when a bullet punched through the panel 2 inches from his arm. Even half dying, the man kept his priorities weirdly wholesome. My father was trying to stand. Dante saw him. Everything warm left his face at once. Leave him, he said. I stared. Dante. He brought them inside my house. He also came here. He came under guard. My father looked from one of us to the other and finally seemed to understand that guilt did not buy him a bridge back. Heavy steps sounded in the corridor outside. Not rushing, measured, Leon. Dante heard it too. His gaze flicked to the connecting door by the dressing room. Nino, window route. Nino checked the latch, looked 12 stories down and went pale. I'm very devoted, but I want it recorded that I hate heights, dying in drafts. You complain through all three, Dante said. It's a gift. He got the window open anyway. The next minutes lived in me afterward as fragments. Wind rushing cold off Lexington, emergency red light stroking Dante's jaw into something carved. Nino shoving a lowered rope ladder out the window while cursing the structural integrity of luxury hotels. My father collapsing against the wall with one hand over his chest. Then the other door opened and Leon stepped in. He did not raise his gun immediately. Of course he didn't. Men like Leon loved entrances too much for that. Dante, he said, you came. Dante moved half a step in front of me. Pure reflex, pure meaning. Leon smiled faintly. There it is. The weakness. I learned that word from you, Dante said. His voice had gone flatter than rage. Leon glanced at my father on the floor. Marco, honestly, you disappoint me. My father laughed once, wet and miserable. Get in line. That would have been funny anywhere else. Maybe it still was. Nino made a strangled sound that might have been respect. Leon's attention returned to me. Did he tell you I gave him everything? A kingdom? No, I said. He told me about the stairwell. Silence. Something unreadable moved across Leon's face. Annoyance? Memory? It vanished before I could name it. He confuses obedience with guilt, Leon said. A useful habit. I regret what happened to the girl, of course, but men are made by the orders they survive. Dante's hand tightened on his gun. And ruined by the ones they obey. That was the real mirror between them. I saw it then. Leon was what Dante might have become if pain had burned out every human part and left only appetite wearing discipline. A shot cracked from the corridor. Chaos resumed. Nino fired back, then yelped. I am too handsome for this. Which would have been ridiculous if a second later he had not dragged my father bodily toward the window while bullets chewed the wall above them. Dante grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the dressing room door. Almost at the threshold I heard Leon say, she'll make you choose badly. Dante turned just enough to answer over his shoulder. I already did. Then he shot out the chandelier. Glass rained. Darkness swallowed the room. We ran. In the surface stairwell, the smoke alarms began to scream, hotel. Stairs. Locked doors. The past and present crashed together so hard I felt Dante's grip change. Fiercer now, almost painful, as if the building itself had become an enemy with memory. Halfway down the landing, he stopped. Not because of bullets. Because the stairwell door below us had jammed. For one terrible second, I saw it happen to him. The old fire, the locked exit, the 19-year-old boy following orders that killed his sister. His face went white under the blood. Dante. He looked at the handle, not at me. I took his hand and pressed the slim hotel needle still clutched in my fist into his palm. Break it, I said. His gaze snapped to mine. Break the door, I whispered. Not yourself, that brought him back. He stepped forward, put 2 shots through the lock, and kicked the metal bar until the door flew inward. We ran again. Outside in the alley, cold air hit like another life. Sirens approached from too many directions. Nino stumbled out after us, half carrying my father, swearing magnificently. Behind them came one last figure through the smoke-black service door. Leon. Alive. The war had narrowed to a point. Dante pushed me behind the armored car as men spread through the alley with guns drawn. His face when he looked at Leon was no longer the face of the man from my wedding photographs. It was older, harder, more honest. One of them was not going to survive what came next. And we all knew it. The final battle did not happen like cinema. There was no music, no clean speeches, no neat exchange of ideology beneath dramatic rain. There was only an alley behind a luxury hotel that smelled like diesel, wet brick, blood, and scorched wiring while men who had outlived too much tried to finish each other before dawn. Dante shoved me behind the engine block of the nearest car and turned to go. I caught his sleeve. He looked down. Not impatient, not surprised either. As if some part of him had always known I would reach for him when it mattered most, not because I was fearless, but because I was done pretending distance could save either of us. There's a rear loading dock, I said quickly. Belladonna keeps the service alarm panel in the laundry corridor, left of the boilers. If we trip it fully, the fire doors seal the east exits. His gaze sharpened. How do you know that? I used to deliver gowns here before I married you. That drew the smallest, bleakest flash of pride across his face. Stay down. No. Adriana, you said we fight as a consequence of choices. My hand tightened on his sleeve. I'm choosing. There was no time to argue. Leon's men were already repositioning. Nino fired from behind a dumpster and shouted, For the record, if I die, bury me in a fitted suit. Morella says I look broad and double-breasted. Focus, Dante said. I am focused on aesthetics. Then he moved. I stayed low and ran for the service entrance with one of Dante's younger men at my shoulder. Inside, the hotel had become a body in panic. Alarms strobing, guests being herded, smoke beginning to crawl under door frames from the shattered stairwell landing. We cut through laundry and steam and the metallic tang of overheated pipes until I found the red emergency box beside the boilers. My hands shook, I forced them still. Pattern logic, seam logic, panic logic, it was all the same thing. Find the structure. Pull the right thread. I hit the override and sealed the east corridor. Somewhere above us, heavy doors slammed shut. Outside, gunfire changed rhythm. When I emerged back into the alley, Dante had Leon pinned behind a black sedan while 2 of Vescari's men bled out under the loading dock light. Nino was on one knee, grinning wildly through a split lip. My father sat propped against the wall with Julia's hand pressed to his chest in guilt written into every line of him. Then Leon saw me. That was his mistake. He broke cover to change angle. Dante shot him once through the side. Leon staggered, didn't fall. Of course he didn't. Men like him believed their own endings were beneath them. He got one last round off. It hit Marco Bellini. My father jerked, exhaled, and folded in on himself like cloth losing structure. Everything slowed. I reached him first. Blood spread hot through my hands as I sank to the pavement beside him. He looked startled more than pained, as if some part of him had believed he would live forever inside consequences and never meet one directly. "Adriana," he whispered. I leaned down because I was still his daughter, however damaged the fact. "I'm here." He coughed red. "I loved you badly." The alley dissolved at the edges. Not because it absolved him, it didn't, but because it was the truest thing he had said. "I know," I whispered. His fingers moved weakly against my wrist, searching for the skill that had once made a world for both of us. "Better thread," he murmured, delirious now. "Always use better thread." I laughed and cried at once, then he died. Across the alley, Dante closed the distance to Leon with murder on his face and grief under it. The old man was on one knee, blood darkening his side, still trying to smile. "You owe me," Leon said. Dante stopped 3 feet away. "That's what men like you always think. I made you." "No." Dante's voice was quiet, deadly in the most terrible way because it was stripped clean of theater. "You found me broken and taught me to mistake obedience for worth." Leon's eyes flickered. Maybe he heard too late the verdict inside it. Dante looked once toward me. Not long, just enough. Then back at the man who had raised him like a weapon and left a girl to burn behind a locked hotel door. When he fired, he did not look away. The sound cracked through the alley and ended 20 years of debt in a single efficient act. No triumph followed it, only breath, smoke, sirens closer now, men checking bodies. Nino crossing himself in 3 sloppy directions because even his piety had poor logistics. Dante stood over Leon's body for a second that felt like a grave being filled from the inside. Then he came to me. He knelt in my father's blood without hesitation and touched my face with both hands, searching for damage the way he had in Suite 1106, the way he always would if given the chance. "It's over," he said. I looked past him at the dead man in the alley, at my father against the wall, at the hotel where so much had begun and ended inside locked rooms. "No," I said softly. "It cost too much for that." Something broke open in his eyes then, not tears. He had used those up elsewhere in life. But a rawness I had only glimpsed around the edges until now. He leaned forward until his forehead rested against mine. "I know. When the police finally came in through the channels money arranged, the statements were made and unmade around us. Stories were purchased. Cameras redirected. Bodies moved according to old agreements. This was the part no love could wash clean. At dawn, we brought my father home. Rosa lit candles. Morella made coffee nobody drank. Julia stitched Nino again because he had reopened his side trying to carry 3 cases of ammunition, for morale. He complained the entire time and held Morella's hand whenever she came near enough, pretending not to notice he was doing it. The villa was quieter than I had ever heard it. Dante stood at the window in the east salon while light came over the city and turned the glass white. I went to him because grief was the only honest direction left. He did not turn when I stopped beside him. "Do you regret me?" I asked. His hand tightened once on the window latch. Then he looked at me, and the answer in his face was so fierce it hurt. No, I believed him. The war was done. The old man who made him was dead. My father was buried by afternoon beneath the family name he had dishonored and still somehow belonged to. Nothing was repaired. Everything had changed. And because truth was cruel, both things were real at once. It was over. Grief did not leave the villa. It learned the rooms. 3 weeks after the funeral, I still found it in small places. In the empty chair at the kitchen table where my father would never sit. In the bolt of silk I kept meaning to move from the workroom and never did. In the way Dante paused outside the chapel now as if entering cost him something exact. Life returned anyway. That offended me at first, then comforted me, then offended me again. Men still came and went from the study. Numbers still had to be made harmless. Favors still needed paying. The city did not stop because one monster died and another man survived him. But the house softened around the edges in ways I had not expected. Morella started leaving extra cannoli on Nino's plate and insulting him more tenderly while doing it. He, in turn, announced he was sacrificing his physique for love and had the solemnity of a saint about it. Rosa pretended not to like anyone and began teaching me where the villa kept the winter linen as if that were not its own kind of acceptance. One afternoon, I found Dante in the west sitting room with a pile of account books open and my ruined wedding veil folded beside them. I stopped in the doorway. "Why do you have that?" He looked up. His expression gave nothing away at first. Then carefully, "I was deciding whether to ask before touching something that belongs to you." The answer undid me a little. "It's only fabric," I said. His gaze dropped to the veil. "No," he said. "It isn't." I came in and sat across from him. Between us lay silk, paper, and all the things people tried to hide inside both. "What do you want with it?" He slid a small box toward me, not a velvet ring box. A wooden one, plain and smooth, the kind old tailors used for expensive buttons. Inside was my grandmother's thimble, the silver one, the good one, the one I thought I had lost when I moved into the villa after the wedding chaos. I looked up sharply. Where did you find this? In the lining of the coat you wore the night you came back through the gate. My throat tightened. You kept it. Yes. Neither of us said why that mattered. It simply did. He rose and came around the table. When he stopped in front of me, the room seemed to settle around his silence the way rooms always did around storms. This is badly timed, he said. I almost laughed. That sounds promising. It isn't meant to be. A pause. I don't know how to offer you a gentle life, Adriana. You know that now. I stood because it felt impossible to sit while he looked at me like that. He took the thimble from the box and turned it once between his fingers, the metal flashing. I can give you a house with locks that matter and enemies that don't stop just because I buried one of them. I can give you my name already, but that part was never the point. His voice lowered. I can give you truth, badly and late, but all of it. I can give you the man who fails at mercy when fear gets there first and still keeps trying because of you. Nothing in me knew how to breathe. He held out the thimble to me like it was a ring. I should have asked the first time. Tears burned hard behind my eyes. Adriana Bellini Salvatore, he said, and this time my full name sounded like a vow made on purpose. Will you stay my wife in a way that belongs to you too? A proposal after the wedding, after blood, after lies. After survival. Of course it would be this man's version of romance. No flowers, no kneeling, no illusion that what he offered was easy. Just truth laid bare and his hands steady while doing it. I took the thimble from him. Yes, I whispered, his eyes closed once, briefly. Relief, when it came to Dante, always looked almost like pain. When he opened them, there was something in them I had never seen directed at me without shadow. He touched my cheek. Sarta. The word no longer meant useful hands. It meant the woman who had stayed after seeing the whole cost. I leaned into his palm before I could stop myself. You make that sound dangerous. It is then, because life had no shame about its timing. Nino flung open the sitting room doors with a ledger in one hand and a cannolo in the other. I need a witness, he declared. Morella told me if I call ricotta a recovery protein one more time, she'll... He stopped dead, looked at our faces, looked at the box. Oh. From the hallway, Morella's voice floated in. If you interrupted something important, I will poison you slowly. Nino pressed a hand to his heart. You see? This is courtship in our culture. Threat first, pastry second. I laughed against Dante's shoulder because at some point he had moved close enough for that to happen and neither of us had marked the distance closing. Dante, to my astonishment, did not step away. He only said without taking his eyes off mine, Nino. Yes, boss? Get out, joyfully. He backed out of the room and nearly collided with Rosa, who glanced in, took in the scene in one ruthless sweep and muttered, about time, before pulling the doors shut again. Quiet returned. Dante's thumb traced the curve just below my ear. One more thing. What? His gaze dropped, then rose again. That almost undoing look, the one that made my pulse feel like a borrowed thing. You're mine, he said softly. But only if you keep choosing it. It was the first time he had used the words. Not possession as conquest, possession as a vow to remain chosen. I put the thimble back into his hand and closed his fingers around it. Then keep asking, I said. He kissed me slow enough for the whole house to disappear. At dusk we ate in the kitchen with Nino, Morella, Rosa, and Julia because grief had taught us formality was sometimes just loneliness in tailored clothes. Somebody laughed, somebody nearly cried. Nino accused the risotto of seduction. Morella told him he was not handsome enough to be seduced by rice. It was ordinary. In this house, that felt miraculous. 9 months later, the first thing he heard when he walked into the nursery was the soft metallic click of my silver thimble against wool. He stopped in the doorway. I did not look up immediately. I was seated by the window with one of his jackets over my knees and a square of midnight blue cashmere pinned across the elbow where the fabric had torn. Our son, still only 3 months old and already offended by sleep, had finally surrendered in the cradle near the radiator, one fist tucked under his cheek. The room smelled like warmed milk, cedar polish, and the rain Dante had brought in on his coat. Click, needle in, click, needle out. By then I knew exactly what that sound did to him. It had become part of the house, part of us. When I finally lifted my head, he was still standing there as if the sight had caught him somewhere unarmored. Black overcoat damp at the shoulders, tie loosened, face marked by the long day the city had asked of him. He looked older than the man who had walked out of my bedroom and locked the door behind him the night I found the receipts. Not aged. Changed. Some of the old violence had gone quieter in him. Not gone. Never that. But no longer the only language his body knew. You're home late, I said softly, his mouth curved by the smallest degree. I'm aware. Your son disagreed with the schedule. Our son, he said automatically. I smiled down at the jacket. Then our son has your temper. He came closer on silent feet and stood over my chair. His hands settled, warm and heavy, on the back of my neck. Not controlling, belonging. The first time he had touched me there, gunfire had been cracking through belladonna. The first time I had noticed the exact temperature of his stillness, I had mistaken it for coldness. Now I knew better. Stillness was simply how he held back the flood. What tore it? I asked, lifting the sleeve. Car door. A pause. And impatience. Dangerous combination. I was coming home. That should not have mattered as much as it did. It did anyway. He looked at the jacket in my lap, at the neat line of my stitches disappearing into dark wool. You're doing it again. I slid the needle through and drew it tight. Mending your damage? Yes. It was the same thing he had seen in me in Chapter 1. The same thing he had named in the clinic room with blood on his shoulder and war outside the door. I knew that now. Knew it in the marrow-deep way a woman knows the shape of a love that has already broken and remade her. I tied off the thread and smoothed the patch flat. Then I reached into the inner pocket to check whether the lining had caught. My fingers brushed paper. Everything in me went still. Dante felt it immediately, of course he did. He crouched beside my chair. What is it? I withdrew the folded slip. A hotel receipt. For one impossible second, the old pain flashed so vividly that I smelled belladonna's lilies and gunpowder again. The room vanished. The baby's breathing vanished. There was only paper, date, room number. Then I looked down and saw the handwriting across the bottom. Nursery wing deposit, Hotel Belladonna renovation fundraiser, paid by D. Salvatore, pick up crib linens Friday. I started laughing so hard, tears came into my eyes. Dante stared at me. Adriana. I handed him the receipt. He read it once, then looked up and saw the shape of what I had thought after that one terrible blink. A strange mix of horror and dark amusement crossed his face. That hotel is cursed for us, he said. It really is. He exhaled. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed too. Low, rough, rare enough that our son startled in the cradle and made a betrayed little sound before settling again. I touched the paper. You never told me you funded the nursery wing. You never asked. That is an infuriating answer, yes. Some things never changed. He took the jacket from my lap and set it aside, then very carefully lifted our son from the cradle. Watching Dante hold the baby had ruined me in slow increments over the past months. All that lethal competence turned impossibly gentle, as if large hands could learn reverence if given enough reason. Our son blinked up at him with the solemn distrust of infants and yawned. Dante's expression softened in that guarded, private way I had once thought impossible for his face. Rosa says he likes the sound of your sewing, he said. He likes the radiator and warm milk. I don't flatter myself. I do. The baby settled against his chest. Rain tapped the nursery window. Downstairs, I could hear Nino arguing with Morella about whether a man carrying groceries burned enough calories to qualify for extra bread. She called him a peacock. He called himself misunderstood. The entire house somehow had survived into this. I rose and stood in front of Dante. He lowered his head until his forehead touched mine, our son safe between us like a small breathing miracle. Do you know, he said quietly, what it costs me now? I looked at him. What? To hear that little click from the hallway and know I'm home. His thumb brushed my wrist where the pulse still betrayed me after all this time. To walk into a room and see you repairing something of mine before you ask what I broke. His voice went rough. To know you still do it. There it was, the bookend. The truth he had carried from the first night into the last. I touched his jaw. You noticed too much. Only what matters. He kissed me gently because the baby was between us and life had become tender in ways I had once mistrusted. Outside, his world remained what it was. Armed men, old debts, quiet threats, folded into expensive paper. But inside this room, there was a cradle, a patched jacket, rain on glass, and the man I had chosen with open eyes. Not because he became safe, because he became known. Dante drew back just enough to look at me. His eyes went to the mended elbow on the jacket, then back to my face. Sarta, he said. Warm now, entirely. I smiled. Yes, better thread. For 1 second, I couldn't breathe. My father's last delirious instruction. A joke and a wound and a blessing, transformed in his mouth into something gentler than grief had any right to become. So I nodded and leaned into him and listened to the rain and the baby and the life we had built from torn things. And if you ask me whether I would choose him again, knowing exactly what his love cost us both, yes.